Hi, this is Matthew with Downtime Activities, and today I'm going to be doing a deck tech for you that's a little different than your regular Commander deck tech. The commander of this deck is Varragoth, Bloodsky Sire, but it's really a hidden commander deck, which is a commander deck where your commander isn't in the command zone, but actually in the other 99 cards. The real commander of this deck is Haakon, Stromgald Scourge, and he is super cool. Ever since I read him the first time, I knew I wanted to make some sort of deck out of his ability because it's so cool and unique, but being a commander player and with his limitations, I thought it wasn't really possible, but I think this deck tech will prove that wrong. You can make a really cool deck that is headed by Stromgald Scourge himself, only hidden away in the 99.
Technically, the commander of this deck is Varragoth, Bloodsky Sire. He's a 3-mana 2/3 with Death Touch, and Boast, for 1 and a black, target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it. I say technically because he's the commander of our deck only because of that Boast ability. That Boast ability allows us to tutor up some cards that we're going to use to get our true commander out of our deck or hand and into our graveyard. That true hidden commander is Haakon, Stromgald Scourge. He is a 3/3 zombie knight that you can only play from your graveyard, not from anywhere else. This includes the command zone, so we can't have him as our starting commander. As long as he is in play, though, you may play knight cards from your graveyard. This will be the main engine of our deck. We're going to get him into our graveyard using a couple of different cards. The most common tutor target with Varragoth's Boast ability is going to be Buried Alive. This lets us search our library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into our graveyard. This lets us put Haakon, as well as a couple other creatures that interact well with his ability, into our graveyard to get that gravy train rolling. We're also going to run a Final Parting, which is a 5-mana tutor, letting us search for 2 cards. 1 goes to our hand, 1 goes to our graveyard. This can put Haakon into the graveyard, and another card that interacts well with him in our hand. We also run Gravebreaker Lamia, which similarly enters the battlefield, search the library for a card, put it into the graveyard. Typically going to be Haakon, unless we already have Haakon out, then we'll search for something else. This also reduces the cost of cards in our graveyard by 1, which is relevant when we're starting to do cool combo things with Haakon. We're also going to run a Scepter of Fugue here. Black artifact, not a super common include in a commander deck. 1 and a black, target player discards a card, only able to activate that during your turn. This lets us discard Haakon if we draw him naturally on accident. Adds to Black Devotion, which can be relevant in some cases, and worst case scenario is just a way to make your opponents discard cards here or there. Next, I'm going to go into the payoffs, the knights, for this Haakon deck. First knight I'm going to go over, Order of the Ebon Hand. A 2-mana, 2/1 with Pro White, the 2 mana both being black, again, relevant for mono black devotion things. He has protection from white, pay 2 black, give himself +1/+0, and pay 1 black to get first strike. Not a typical commander card, not super powerful, but we can make a lot of black mana and make him huge and able to wipe much bigger threats out or players out. And the art's super cool, and it's one of my favorite cards of all time, so I had to include it in this deck. We're also going to run Josu Ves, Lich Knight, a 4-mana 4/5 with Menace, and a kicker ability that makes a giant army of zombies. Sir Conrad the Grim will also be in this deck. Good, powerful knight that is a combo engine for our deck once we start casting and sacking knights over and over again. We'll also run Markov Dread Knight, 5-mana 3/3 flying vampire knight that you can pay 3 mana and discard a card to give 2 +1/+1 counters. Not super powerful here, but it is a discard outlet in case Haakon ends up in our deck, and is also just a decent knight with evasion that we can make big while putting relevant creatures into our graveyard. We'll also run Cavalier of Night, 5-mana 4/5 lifelink. He enters the battlefield, we can sack a creature to destroy a creature an opponent controls, which will also be a part of us just sacking our creatures for value as part of the plan of this deck. And then when he dies, we can return a creature with convert mana cost 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Lastly, Liliana's Standard Bearer, 3-mana 3/1 with Flash. When it enters the battlefield, we draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures that died under our control this turn. This can be a really powerful draw engine once we get a sacrifice outlet and a couple of cheap knights going, where you can just recur this every turn, do a bunch of sacrifice shenanigans, and then draw a bunch of cards. Those are our good generic knights. We also have a couple of knights that we're going to run with the adventure mechanic, because they interact in a really cool way in this deck. One of those is going to be Foulmire Knight, 1 mana 1/1 with Death Touch, but you can pay 3 as an instant and go on an adventure where you draw a card and you lose a life. We'll also run Order of Midnight, 2 mana 2/2, flying, can't block, and has a 2 mana sorcery adventure where you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. Smitten Swordmaster, cool powerful one here as well, 2 mana 2/1 lifelink, 1 sorcery adventure, you gain X life, and each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of knights you control. And lastly, Murderous Rider. If you were around when this was in Standard, you know that this was all over the place. Super cool, 3 mana, 2/3 lifelink. When it dies, it goes on the bottom of its owner's library. And much more importantly here, an instant speed 3 mana, destroy a creature or planeswalker, you lose 2 life. These cards are really powerful because they give you options. They're a creature or a spell, depending on what you need. Specifically though, in this deck, it's really cool because there's things that you can cast as knights, sacrifice, get into your graveyard, and then we run cards like Phyrexian Reclamation, where you pay 2 mana and 2 life to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and then all of a sudden we're casting this adventure, then casting them as creatures, and then sacrificing them for value, and then returning them to our hand, and continuing that process over and over again, just grinding value away as we're doing this. Part of grinding this value requires sacrifice outlets. The 2 main ones we're going to run here are Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder. These 2 are just 1 mana creatures that we can get back to our hand with some of our previously mentioned effects, and are free sack outlets. Both of them have an ability to just sacrifice a creature and get some small value. Scry 1 for the Viscera Seer and a +1/+1 counter on the Carrion Feeder. These 2 are major engine pieces of this deck that allow us to get these big sacrifice loops going. We also are going to run a couple more just generic cards that go well with Haakon and act as payoffs for him. One of these will be Nameless Inversion, a 2 mana weird style of instant. It's a tribal instant shapeshifter. It gives a creature +3/-3 and lose all creature types until end of turn. The important piece here is this instant spell is technically a changeling, which means that it is every creature type at all times. This interaction with Haakon means that you have a 2 mana instant speed, -3 removal spell that you can cast over and over again from your graveyard, since it is technically a knight. We'll also run a Gravecrawler because it's just a cool, powerful sack outlet thing that you can recur a bunch of times because Haakon is also technically a zombie, so he's not a knight, but you can still cast him from your graveyard because his text, so same sort of deal as the knight thing, just a cheap creature we can sack over and over again. With the Haakon specific stuff kind of out of the way, we're going to go into the other major plan of this deck, which is just mono black things. Any mono black deck you run has a lot of these cards and effects in it, and you're going to see nothing different here with this one. Big thing is big mana. Mono black really rewards you for being mono black if you lean into that, and we're going to do that in a major way here. 2 things we can do to produce a lot of black mana are Cryptghast and Caged Sun. These will both work pretty similarly, where Cryptghast allows for all of our swamps to tap for 2 mana instead of just 1, and Caged Sun will allow almost all of our sources making black mana to tap for 2, as well as giving us a little bonus to our team. These 2 will give us lots of black mana to pump into some of the other effects we have. We're also going to be running some spells that are payoffs for how many swamps are going to be on the battlefield by the nature of us being a mono black deck. We will run Dread Presence, a 4 mana 3/3 that whenever swamp enters the battlefield under our control, we can either draw a card and lose a life, or deal 2 damage to any target and gain 2 life. This just turns into every turn us sniping little creatures, dealing a little incremental damage, gaining life, or just awesome card advantage as the game goes on. We'll also run a couple of removal spells that care about our swamps in Defile and Corrupt. Defile, definitely the cheaper, more efficient option here, is just a 1 mana instant that gives a creature -1/-1 for each swamp we control. Great removal spell, will kill almost anything, gets around indestructible, must run in any mono black deck more or less. Corrupt's a little more expensive, but has a really cool powerful effect nevertheless. It deals damage equal to the number of swamps we control to target creature or player, and you gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. This means that if we have just a ton of swamps out, we can finish off players with it, or stabilize ourselves by gaining a bunch of life. We'll also run a board wipe in Mutilate that gives all creatures -1/-1 for each swamp. Most of the time this is just going to be destroy all creatures including the indestructible ones, so really good here. And another kind of pet card that's super cool, so you have to run it, is Corlash, Heir to Blackblade. He's a 4-mana star whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of swamps you control, and you can regenerate for 2 mana. He has a Grandeur ability, but that's not relevant here because this is a singleton commander format. He's not an exceptionally powerful card, but he will be a 4-mana big cool dork that is hard to get rid of. And this deck is already super metal with all the cool mono black cards in it, so we wanted to include him here to keep that theme going. I've mentioned our Black Devotion a couple of times while going through this deck tech. There's 2 cards that are real payoffs for this, and those are going to be Sanguimancy and Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Sanguimancy, just a really powerful refill of cards into our hand with our devotion, and Grey Merchant of Asphodel, a way to deal a bunch of damage to all of our opponents and gain a bunch of life, sometimes just winning the game when he enters the battlefield. With all this mono black stuff going on, all this black mana to spend and doubling all this black mana, we need somewhere to pump all this mana into. There's 3 cards mainly that we're going to be doing this with, and that's going to be Bloodhusk Ritualist, which is a 3-mana 2/2 with multi-kicker for 1 black, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card for each time it was kicked. When you're making 1 million black mana, this basically just reads, pay a big pile of mana, play this creature, and it enters in and wipes out one of your opponent's hands. Very, very strong. We'll also run a Dreadshade, which 3-mana 3/3 with the typical Shade ability, 1 black, gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Great for devotion, cool card, feels pretty metal and hardcore like a lot of this mono black stuff does, so it needed to be in the deck. And last but not least, Pestilence. 4-mana enchantment. At the end of your turn, if there are no creatures in play, you have to bury it, but it allows you to pay 1 black and deal 1 damage to all creatures and players as many times as you'd like. This can be a way, if you have the most life, to pump a bunch of mana into it and wipe all the other players out, or just control the board and destroy all little creatures or up to only a certain number of creatures, just always keeping 1 in play to make sure that you're able to keep your Pestilence going. Although Varigoth is really only our commander because we wanted something that could tutor out the stuff we need to get Haakon into the bin, we still want to protect him and use his abilities as many times as possible. So we have a couple of cards in this deck that'll help us do just that. 2 equipment cards here. 1, Swiftfoot Boots, will give him Hexproof and Haste. Everyone knows Swiftfoot Boots. Classic commander card. Good for Haakon too. Any of our stuff that we want to protect. And also Whisper Silk Cloak. It'll give Unblockable and Shroud. Shroud protects from spells, and the Unblockable means that we can attack with Varigoth every turn, activating that boast ability, and getting to tutor whatever the most relevant card is on top of our deck. We'll also run some spells here, a Without Weakness, a Dark Dabbling, and a Malakir Rebirth. Without Weakness allows us to give him Indestructible until end of turn, or any of our creatures Indestructible, and can also cycle for 2, so if it's not relevant we can just get a new card for it. Dark Dabbling, 3-mana, instant speed, regenerate target creature, draw a card. If you have Spell Mastery, then instead you get to regenerate each other creature you control as well. This means that it'll act as a protection spell that replaces itself for Varigoth, but also has board wipe protection in the later game when we have a couple of spells in the yard. Malakir Rebirth just is a kind of freebie here. Gives our creature the ability that when this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control for only 1 mana at instant speed and 2 life. But it's one of the flip lands, so it can act as a land if we need it to be, and then it's just a protection spell for free on top of that, so why not? We also run a Daring Fiend Bonder here, 4-mana 5/1 with haste that attacks each combat if able. The whole goal is for him to die, because then you can exile him from your graveyard to put an Indestructible counter on a creature, and that will just let us, similarly to the Whisper Silk Cloak, kind of attack with impunity every turn and get that sweet boast value. Moving on to our removal, we are in mono black. This means we have lots of awesome removal options. We're going to start with a couple of our targeted removal, miscellaneous. There's a lot of spells you could put here. I'm just going to list off the 4 that are currently in this deck. They might not be the best 4, and there's other ones you can put in or take out here and do whatever you want with, but these are 4 that I'm running right now. I'm running 1 Doomblade because it just feels right to always run a Doomblade because everything dies to Doomblade. Not everything, not non-black creatures, but destroys everything else. A Go for the Throat to destroy a target non-artifact creature, an Ultimate Price to destroy a target mono-colored creature, and then a Murderous Cut, which is 5-mana instant that you can delve down to only costing 1, and it just destroys any creature. On top of this, we're going to run a couple of more interesting single target removal spells, one of which is, in my opinion, a must-run spell in any mono black deck and in most decks that have black in them in Commander, in Feed the Swarm. 2-mana sorcery, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, and then you lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. Black doesn't usually get to kill enchantments, so this is a really, really powerful effect to have, really useful whenever there's a pesky enchantment on the board. We're also going to run an Echoing Decay. Not super common to be seen in a lot of Commander decks, but I think it's actually a sneaky all-star hit. 2-mana instant, target creature, and all other creatures with the same name as that creature get -2/-2 until end of turn. This can act as a way to just kill a smaller creature when you need it to, but more importantly, against token decks, at least most token decks, this will act as a board wipe against them. Imagine you're up against an elf deck, or a goblin deck, or a zombie deck, and most of their creatures are 1/1s or 2/2s, and they're all technically the same name because they're all the same token. You hit them with an Echoing Decay and it wipes them all out. We'll also run an Eldest Reborn here because it's just a ton of value piled onto a card, making all of your opponents sack a creature or planeswalker, then all your opponents discard a card, and then allowing you to recur a creature or planeswalker from a graveyard onto the battlefield. It's a lot of power in one enchantment and just a smash hit here, I think. With targeted removal out of the way, it's time for the board wipes. Again, we're in mono black. There are a lot of options here. I'm running 5 board wipes, 6 if you include the Mutilate we talked about before. I like to have lots of board wipe options in this deck because we recover so well from them. You could drop that number down if you wanted and also run different or better board wipes here. These are just the ones I've settled on that I like. First one here is Force of Despair, which is only kind of a board wipe. It just destroys all creatures that entered the battlefield this turn, but it's 3-mana instant speed, and you can also cast it for free by exiling another black card from your hand instead of paying its mana cost. This allows us to kind of be shields down and have a player across from us make a really big turn where they end up with a bunch of powerful stuff, and we can wipe it all away without even actually having to spend any mana. It also is just a fine removal spell too for a single creature, only a couple creatures, if you need it to, if you just cast it after they've cast their creature for the turn. So it's got some flexibility there, and the free cost is just really valuable and cool. I also run an Oblivion Stone. It's kind of a similar mindset to the Feed the Swarm. There's a couple of permanent types that we don't interact well with, and Oblivion Stone allows us to just wipe everything away, all non-land permanents. It also, if you have a lot of black mana, you can start putting fate counters on stuff before then, and that can be useful if you wipe the whole board and are left with a Varagoth to rebuild. That's a pretty powerful turn. We'll also run a Crux of Fate, 5 mana, destroy all dragon creatures or destroy all non-dragon creatures. This could probably be any number of other board wipes. I like this one just because it's fun to get somebody who's like an Ur-Dragon player or something, and the rest of the time it's just a 5 mana board wipe, so why not? We're also going to run a Necromantic Selection, 7 mana to destroy all creatures and then return a creature card put into the graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. It allows us to wipe the board but also recover really well by taking whatever the most useful thing is during that board wipe and keep it on our side. And lastly, Decree of Pain, 8 mana, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated, and draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. You can also pay 5 to cycle it, and when you do that it gives all creatures -2/-2 until end of turn. Just a super flexible card that if you get to the big 8 mana bomb drop of it, lets you reset the board while also resetting your hand so that you're well stocked to take on this new fresh board state. To round things off, for the interesting cards in our deck at least, we're going to just have some miscellaneously good black cards that I want to run and like, so here you go. Phyrexian Obliterator. If you've not played with Phyrexian Obliterator, you're not doing it right. This card is awesome. Again, one of my favorite cards of all time, so a must include in this deck for me. It is 4 black mana for a 5/5 with trample, and whenever a source deals damage to it, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. It is a stonewall blocker that they can't attack into, and a really menacing threat that whenever it attacks they can't really block, because anything besides destroy target creature or board wipe effects are going to make them just sack so many permanents that it's not worth that exchange. We'll also run a Damnable Pact and a Profane Command. These are just a couple of X spells, good black spells that draw cards or give you other value, something to pump all that black mana into, so why not? we're going to run a Dream Devourer. Pretty powerful card that I think is a little underappreciated. It gives all non-land cards in your hand without foretell, and it makes their foretell cost equal to their mana cost reduced by 2. This is kind of like a ramp option in our deck, which Mono Black doesn't have a lot of options for, apart from its doubling effects. Basically what this does is it lets us exile a card from our hand and end up casting it for 2 mana less, kind of ramping us 2 mana on each spell we use it for, letting us get big payload spells out sooner in the game. It also gets +2/+0 whenever you foretell a card, but we're really just doing it for the kind of ramp effect. We'll also run an Ob Nixilis Reignited, kind of the most white bread generic planeswalker you've ever seen in its effects, but they're still really good. It's a 5 mana, 5 loyalty, +1 card advantage, -3 removal, -8, probably win the game eventually. It's just a powerful effect. We'll also run a Phyrexian Arena, more card advantage, something to keep our hand full. Gives us just the ability to draw an extra card every turn. We'll run a Command the Dread Horde, a really powerful effect that lets us reanimate a bunch of creatures all at once, losing some life in the process. And a Opposition Agent. Don't get too mad at me. I know there's some people who dislike Opposition Agent quite a bit. It really depends on your play group and your play style. I like Opposition Agent here because tutoring is our thing, and I don't want anyone else to get to have that kind of fun. But seriously, tutoring happens a lot. There's a lot of tutoring that goes on, and it's pretty powerful to have him flash in and take over that stuff from your opponents. To finish up this deck tech, we're going to go over the not as interesting stuff, some mana, rock, and land choices that I made. You could probably do to put more ramp in this deck than what I've done, but I'm kind of banking on the fact that we have lots of tutor options and we can get those big mana doublers out pretty easily. So I only ran a couple of artifact ramp spells here. I'm running a Charcoal Diamond and a Thought Vessel as 2 mana rocks, and Bontu's Monument, which is a 3 mana artifact that gives all of our black creature spells a cost reduction of 1, allowing us to do really cool stuff, again, casting things from our graveyard for really cheap, sacking, repeating. And whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and gain 1 life. This card acts as an engine for us in draining our opponents out of the game. A brief note here, there is no Soul Ring in this deck. You could probably run a Soul Ring. You probably should run a Soul Ring always. I've started making it a habit to not run Soul Ring as often because I like having another interesting card in my deck or having a different choice. But you wouldn't be wrong to run one here, obviously. Lastly, I'm going to go over the non-basic land decisions I made. I'm just running 6 non-swamp lands here. Just a couple of cool effects or things that I think are useful. One is a Mortuary Mire, which enters the battlefield tapped and taps for black mana, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it lets us put target creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. This helps with some of our adventure knights and other effects we have, so just a cool combo with the deck. We'll run a Castle Lochthwain here. Because it's a mono black deck, it's going to enter in untapped almost always because you have a lot of swamps in this deck. It taps for black, and then just has 3 mana, draw a card, lose a life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Just a way to draw a card off a land is always powerful. We'll run a Bojuka Bog, because every black deck should. It's just free graveyard hate. Graveyards are used a lot, like they are in this deck, so having it is always useful in any deck that you make. Also run Ifnir Deadlands here, kind of just free removal on a land. It taps for colorless, you can pay 1 life to have it tap for black, but it also has the effect, pay 4 mana, sacrifice a desert. Ifnir Deadlands is our only desert. And put 2 -1/-1 counters on target creature and opponent controls. You can only do that as a sorcery, but just a land that enters untapped and can kill a 2-power creature seems useful, and why not? Also run a Rogue's Passage, because the unblockability goes well with Varragoth, so 4 mana tap, target creature can't be blocked this turn, just allows us to keep reusing his ability in a pinch. And lastly, a Barren Moor, which just enters tapped and can be cycled away. Round the rest of the deck out with some basic swamps, and that's what we got.
And that's our Haakon Stromgald Scourge hidden commander deck. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you liked the cards we included. If there's stuff you would put in or take out, please put that down in the comments below. If you have a different other style of Haakon brew out there, please put that down there below. I'd love to hear about it. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, give us a like. And go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities. Vargoth, Bloodsky Sire. Haakon, Stromgald Scourge.
Good luck.
Irish Wristwatch, red leather, yellow leather. Vargoth, Bloodsky Sire. Haakon, it's Stromgald Scourge? I guarantee I said Stormgald Scourge at some point.
Do you need to write them on the cheat sheet?
No, we're good. I'll remember. Well, you can trust me. And then he took 12 takes to get this done.